Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hi, Dr. Laurie. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for wanting to come on and being a guest.
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited to talk to you and your listeners.
Awesome. So for my listeners who are not familiar with you and your work, can you talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what drives the passion behind the work that you do?
Absolutely. I am a professor at the University of Florida, and I teach the psychology of human sexuality to about 150 undergrad students a year. I'm also a licensed psychologist in private practice for the last about 30 years, and I'm the author of two books, self-help books, both with the goal of empowering women sexually. A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex and Becoming Cliterate, Why Orgasm Equality Matters and How to Get It. And so, but what do I do? Basically, I help people become more sex positive to enhance their sexuality. And what drives that passion is it's very upsetting to me how little accurate sex education we have in our country and how that harms people in general, but particularly women.
Can you say a little bit more about why that's become such a passion for you?
But yes, so, sex is a natural, important, life-affirming part of existence. But too many times it becomes a source of pain and anguish and upset. And I have developed a passion of helping people, find the truth about their sexuality, embrace their sexuality, and it has ripple effects into how they feel about themselves. And it's also really fun to help people develop positive sexuality. And it's, unlike, even though most people are very uncomfortable talking about sex, I'm just incredibly comfortable and excited to talk about it. And I really find that with some accurate information, sexual problems are some of the easiest problems to overcome. So it's also very rewarding for me to educate people and see them grow and change and be happier.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And you and I met at the APA conference. I actually sat in on your conference where you were talking about your book, Becoming Cliterate, and along with some other topics that went into sex, specifically around women and having sex. And I definitely want to talk about your book, Becoming Cliterate, because I think it's very important. Can you tell us about your book and what was the premise behind that?
Yeah, so the book is really, the goal of the book is to close the orgasm gap. So what is the orgasm gap? Basically, I mean, it's a lot like the pay gap, right? It's a gender-based gap where when women and men get it on together, the women are having significantly fewer orgasms than the men. And that is in casual sex and in relationship sex. And the reason for the orgasm gap, I mean, there's many, many reasons, but contrary to what you may hear popular press say, women's orgasms are hard or elusive. Really, the orgasm gap is a cultural problem. It's not a biological problem. And we know this because when women masturbate or pleasure themselves, they orgasm quickly and within minutes. And when they have sexual encounters with other women, they usually orgasm. it's only when women and men have sexual encounters that the women have fewer orgasms. And the premise of my book is that this is due to the privileging of male sexuality. It's due to basically us believing and being sold this false bill of goods, really, that we should orgasm from intercourse, which is the way men most reliably orgasm, but it is not the way that the vast majority of women most reliably orgasm. So Becoming Cliterate exposes the orgasm gap. It talks about the reasons behind the orgasm gap. And then I provide readers with individual skills to close the gap in their own life, knowledge of their own anatomy, sexual communication skills, different ways to have sexual encounters, and the like.
Awesome. And as you know, I work in my specialty is narcissistic abuse and relationships. And what piqued my interest about your conversation is how the differential or the expectations for women is lesser than in a sexual relationship, which I feel like that in and of itself is a control dynamic and can put us at a greater disadvantage in a relationship and when we're supposed to be most intimate in our relationship, which is in sex. You talk a lot about an orgasm gap, or even as another way of putting it, it almost sounds like brainwashing, the way you put it, in the way that we are taught that we're supposed to have sex a certain way and that it's supposed to feel good. And then if it doesn't, then we fake it.
Yes.
To make our partner feel good.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes.
And I feel like that happens a lot more than what people are comfortable talking about. And so I kind of want to back up a little bit and, talk a little bit about where do you think that comes from? The idea that women are supposed to only orgasm a certain way, and then if they don't, it's abnormal, or, they need to fake it. Where do you think that entire premise comes from? Because I know you talked a lot about media conditioning in your book.
Yeah. And I think it goes way beyond media. I mean, this problem has been going on off and on for centuries. Only a very, very brief period in time in the 60s, maybe did we, kind of the clitoris, which is the hot spot of women's pleasure, did that reach the mainstream. But the clitoris has even been taken out of medical textbooks. I mean, it's such a devaluing of women's sexuality, but the idea really took root, I think, in modern culture with Freud. Freud said that women who have clitoral orgasms are immature, and that as a woman matures, her clitoris will hand its sensitivity over to the vagina. It's absolutely ridiculous. Organs don't change. And that's like saying, well, as you get mature, your right nostril will take in more air than your left, or even more. You'll be able to breathe through your ears once you're mature. I mean, it was a ridiculous, false premise, but people bought it. And so since then we've had generations of women thinking they're broken, something's wrong with them. And then media, once you see this, you can't stop seeing it. I mean, mainstream movies, porn, every sex scene that I've ever seen, there's very little, there's a little kissing, fooling around, there's intercourse, and the woman is just screaming with an orgasm. And the truth is, in those circumstances, most women would not only not orgasm, but they'd have sexual pain from penetration that occurs that quickly. So that's where it all comes from, and that's how it's perpetuated. And it is brainwashing. I've never heard anyone that's interviewed me use that word before, but that is such an accurate word. I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
You are quite welcome. And so it's very interesting to me too, from your book, and this is the reason why I call it brainwashing slash gaslighting, right? Because those are the things those are the terminology that's used in narcissistic abuse. Because in your book, you talk very specifically about um, women who have sex with other women usually have orgasms. Women who have sex with themselves are more likely to orgasm. However, something happens when a woman has sex with a man, and that she doesn't orgasm as frequently. She kind of hides the fact that she's not able to orgasm. Not only that, but women are reverting back to the traditional styles of having sex with a man, missionary, doggy style, and things like that, things in which you reference as being very similar to a way that a man masturbates. So in essence, you're saying that women are having sex to pleasure men and not to pleasure themselves.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. So, in a heterosexual sexual encounter, it
Right.
follows this script, foreplay, just to get her ready for intercourse. And even that word foreplay, it's like implies it's the thing that comes before the most important event. Intercourse, the most important event, male orgasm, sex over, and female often fake. And even the words we use, privilege, male sexuality, we use sex and intercourse as if they're one and the same. And I talk in the book, like if we were privileging female sexuality, which isn't what I'm suggesting equality, we would call intercourse post play and foreplay sex. And so, I think what happens when a woman and a man have sex together, all the focus goes to the intercourse. And that is the way that men most reliably orgasm, and it's not the way women most reliably orgasm.
And I guess that's my whole point in terms of talking about, there's, what do you think is going on that we have stayed one-sided in that focus or in that respect?
Power dynamics, the power dynamics of society in general, and then in specific relationships. I mean, we are stuck in this place where sex still is revolving around male pleasure. Now, not all relationships are certainly like that, but I think I'll be honest with you, especially, given your expertise, I think that the less healthy and equal the relationship is, the more likely. I've been working with a client in an abusive relationship, and she read my book. She had her first orgasm pleasuring herself. She took it to her partner, and he basically said, "That's a crock of you know what." That's not true. I know how women come, and this is how you should come. It's like, okay, you're not going to listen to your partner herself, and you're also not going to listen to an expert or years of research. You know best.
Right. And instead, he's conditioning or trying to condition his partner to believe that she has a problem.
Exactly. And I can't tell you that's how many women come to me saying they have a problem and that they are broken. And they are not broken. Society is broken, and often their relationships are broken, but they are not broken.
Isn't that pretty distressing?
Very, very. That's why I wrote the book. I mean, I was so distressed by this, and I saw it over and over and over. It's very distressing. Yes.
Tell me, in your experience, when women come to you and they're conditioned to believe that they are broken because they cannot achieve an orgasm in the traditional way, missionary or other types of intercourse. Um, Tell me a little bit about what you think is going on there. What's happening?
I think that, most often these are women who have bought, hook, line, and sinker, as the expression goes, into this false belief. And and no one has ever educated them about their own anatomy. No one has ever corrected them. often too, many women fake because of this. And so then they have partners who say, well, all my other partners came this way. I see that a lot. And I have to sometimes intervene with the partners and say, well, those other women might have been faking, you know. Um, so I think, it's just like you said, I like you said brainwashing. You also said gaslighting. It's like mass societal gaslighting around women's
Mm.
sexuality.
Mm. Yeah, that really makes me really think about some things there. And it almost kind of makes me sad, a little bit that we've all this time and we still haven't evolved, in terms of sex and sexuality and, being recognized as having needs that are different and sensitive. Than what we've been conditioned to believe by looking at what's on television, by reading what's in books and or magazine, and even the porn industry, as you mentioned before. So that's very saddening to me, that this continues to happen. And not only that, but it also puts men at a great disadvantage as well. I mean, we've been talking about the woman being dissatisfied and not getting her needs met, but at the same time, as a man, and we're talking specifically about heterosexual relationships now, but as a man, I kind of wonder what that would feel like if you found out that you weren't pleasuring your partner this whole time.
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought this up because I think once we understand the truth about female sexuality, everyone benefits, men and women. And in fact, Ian Kerner has a wonderful book called She Comes First, The Gentleman's Guide to
Yeah,
Pleasuring a Woman. And he has a
yeah.
quote in his book that I also incorporate in Becoming Cliterate. And he basically says, that once men understand that penetration isn't the route to female orgasm, that they can enjoy sex more because of a couple things. It takes pressure off of them to perform, which is the root of a lot of male sexual problems, and that they can love with more of themselves, with their whole
Mm.
selves. And it's a beautiful quote. I really love it. And I do think that this benefits everyone, and because it puts pressure on men to perform sexually and to give a woman an orgasm with their penis. And it just causes so much male insecurity and disconnect with themselves.
Right. And definitely a big miscommunication. Um, what are the long-term effects, in your opinion, of faking it?
Well, I think by faking it, you train your partner to do exactly what doesn't work for you. And the longer the faking goes on, the harder it is to say, like, there's a trust issue then that develops. I was giving a workshop once, and a woman raised her hand, um, and she said, this has been very eye-opening to me, but now I don't know what to do because I have been faking for 30 years. What do I do now?
Wow.
Yeah. And and this was like a feminist conference in LA. So this was a woman who'd identified herself as a long-term feminist. And so it has nothing to do with ideology or education or whatever. It's just such a brainwash. I love that word. I keep coming back to it. So what I said to her is, you got two choices at this point. You can say, I've been faking for 30 years, which might not go over very well. Or you can kind of take the roundabout route and say, I went to this really cool workshop where we talked about women's pleasure. And it turns out that a lot of women get, a lot of intense pleasure from clitoral stimulation and reach orgasm even more easily that way than through penetration. And hey, I'd like to incorporate that into our sex life and make it kind of a new thing. And that's what she chose to do. So And I endorsed that choice after 30 years. So,
What are some of the reasons why women fake it?
well, I can tell you clinically, and I can also tell you there's been research studies, and the two most common reasons women fake it are um, because to avoid appearing abnormal, because they think, they should be orgasming this way, and also to make their partner feel good, to not make their partner feel bad.
Are you able to go back
Yeah.
and tell me why women, what are some of the reasons that women fake it? I'm sorry, you went out there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And you froze a minute too. So
Yeah.
absolutely. So I'll just say what I said again. So I can tell you why women fake it both from a clinical and research position, and they both dovetail. It's this: women fake it for two reasons. The most common reasons, according to research, are to avoid appearing abnormal because they think they should orgasm that way. And the second, equally as common reason is to protect their partner's egos, to make their partner feel good about giving them an orgasm. Because again, both the partner and the woman are buying into the idea that it's the man's job to do this to the woman with his penis.
Wow. And I can see how that would definitely play into a power dynamic or a control dynamic in a relationship, in terms of wanting to please your partner and staying stuck in that for so long. So long.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And I mean, that woman, 30 years, that was the most extreme that's come to me, but it's not that unusual. I've heard lots of stories about long-term faking in a relationship.
That's really sad. I'm wondering too, as you're talking, it sounds like the sex culture is dominated by males, as what you were saying. Um, so, with that being said, how much of the onus is on women, such as yourself and other experts in this field, to kind of change the images that we see, the information that we receive, and how we incorporate that?
Yeah, I feel passionately about that. And there's a lot of other people working passionately for that. Both sex experts and some actresses of late are starting to speak out. I don't know if you know who Rachel Bloom is. She's the star of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Really funny show, actually. And she recently spoke out about this on Twitter and Instagram about how mainstream TV won't let her depict any clitoral stimulation.
Interesting. Where would TV go if we allowed that on TV?
Right. It'd be more honest.
And okay, and so more and more women are speaking out about it. And sometimes I feel like, in order for stuff like this to catch on, it almost becomes like a fad or like a fashion statement, if you understand what I mean, kind of like Me Too movement. Me Too was a movement long before it became a social media movement. It just took one famous person that looked right and sounded right in order for that to kind of really take off. You know what I'm saying?
I know 100% what you're saying because I know the history of Me Too. And it wasn't started by the actresses featured in Time
Correct.
magazine.
Correct.
It was, if I'm getting my history right, it was started by, and I forgot her name, but it was started by an African American woman who no one is acknowledged. So if you can remind me of her name, I would be very appreciative.
I'm going to have to look that up myself because now that I brought it up, and I don't even know what her name is, but I will try to get that information while we're talking. And so, with that being said, why do you think it takes that in order for people to listen?
Right. And, it's funny as you say that, I'll answer that question, but it also is like, if some male star, like, some probably, very handsome white male star, I'll be honest with you, would start speaking about this, we'd be a lot better off, right? Because why? It goes all still back to cultural power dynamics to me, of giving legitimacy to something. And so, although I will say that if, some star picks up this and goes with it, I'll still be happy, because it will be a problem solved, and I say in Becoming Cliterate, like, my hope is that someday a generation of women will read this book and go, what? Why was it considered radical back then? Which I've heard over and over how radical this book is. And it's like, really? Like, that's my hope, is that someday, some women will read this and go, I cannot believe that was considered radical back then.
Right. And by the way, her name was Tarana Burke.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Tarana Burke started the Me Too movement. And so, yeah, I would agree with you. And I don't think that your book is radical, but I do think it's eye-opening. Like, I thought the conference was eye-opening in the way that you talked about sex and put little seeds in there that I had never thought of before. And I think that's kind of part of it too, why we get stuck, because, as I'm thinking about it, we're fed these images so much, or we read things so much, or we learn about things a certain way. Sometimes we get stuck on that, or we take that as gospel. Like, if you think back to when you learned about sex education, which a lot of people, they don't have these open dialogues like you and I are having. They usually have to learn about it because there's a lot of secrecy and shame when you're being raised. So you have to kind of find out through the backdoor approach or through a girlfriend or something like that. But I think there's something in the conditioning in where we learn from our very early stages, like in health education class or sex education class, and on and on. And then not only that, what you see, like you said, the porn industry, or, just the sex industry in general, how we learn about something. So it really takes on that meaning. People say, okay, well, this is what I learned, and so now I'm going to stick with that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that you're hit the nail on the head there.
What's made you sort of change your thinking, or kind of step outside of the box, as I should say?
Well, I think part of it is when the era in which I was raised. I kind of reached my sexual coming of age, if you will, during the height of the feminist movement. And I'm older, right? So, I kind of reached my sexual coming of age right around the time that books like Our Bodies, Ourselves were coming out. And people were talking about things like the clitoris. Although, also sort of like the woman who started the Me Too movement that's gotten no acknowledgement of it. It wasn't Our Bodies, Ourselves that first brought the clitoris into the limelight. It was a book that no one even has ever heard of anymore, called A New View of a Woman's Body, by the Federation of Feminist Health Centers. So anyway, and I had that book on my bookshelf in college, So I had a very sex positive mother, may she rest in peace. And I just sort of grew up really comfortable with sex and my body, and I came of age. And then I, got my training as a psychologist, did my thing. And then just a few years ago, I moved to the University of Florida, and I started teaching this large undergrad class. And I have to tell you, I was floored, shocked, appalled. I don't even know what words to describe, that I realized this whole knowledge of women's sexuality had been lost to this generation. And I said, they are the most misinformed generation of sex ever. There's sexual images all around them, so they think they know, but they're false.
If you have a woman, who's listening to you talk right now, and you're kind of, igniting a fire within her to say, okay, I've been faking it. I now want to change. And this talk sounds really good, but I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my relationship, or I'm going to, my partner's going to be upset with me and da 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 da. If I try to go back and say, I haven't been sexually satisfied by you.
Yeah. So I think it goes back to the woman who's been, here's my two pieces of advice, is that, like the woman who'd been faking 30 years, I mean, this didn't come about by manipulation. It came about by lack of information. And so you might not want to say, hey, for the last 25 years, sex has been terrible. Let's talk about it. A softer startup. I love you. I love having sex with you. I want to do some things to mix it up, improve. That's one way. And in my experience, in healthy relationships, the vast majority of men are very interested in, want to, dedicated to pleasing their partner. In fact, if they weren't, we wouldn't have all this male ego thing, right? I mean, they really want that. They just have been misguided, as we have been. So I find that the vast majority of men are interested in pleasing their partner. They just need honest direction. Now, that said, the other thing I say in the book, and I will repeat here, if you are with a man who is not as interested in your pleasure as his, run fast, turn around, run, do not look back. That is not a partner worth having.
Absolutely. And you took the next question right on out of my mouth. Can you say a little bit more for our listeners who may be listening? Can you say a little bit more about why you believe that's not a partner that's worth having and that they should run?
Okay, because if he's not as interested in your sexual pleasure as his own, then he's not as interested in you as he is himself.
Mm-hmm.
Not a loving, caring partner. It's about him then. It's not about you or the relationship. So run.
Absolutely. And I agree with you 100%, 1,000% actually. But then you have some of those women that are there and they might be thinking to themselves, well, maybe I can fix this. Maybe he's saying no. Maybe he's closed-minded now. But maybe if I just kind of hang in there, this will kind of remedy itself, or I can fix it somehow, or what have you. What do you say to women like that?
Well, I mean, often it's, one thing I say, right, because I'm a therapist, it takes a lot of time. I just finished working with a woman who, it took her 4 years to leave an abusive relationship. The first thing I'd say is, I get it. It's not easy. It's hard. Me saying you shouldn't be in this isn't going to make you leave.
Yeah.
I'd say you have to love yourself enough. You have to respect yourself enough. You have to believe that you are worthy of respect and equal sexual pleasure. So let's work on that, because once you really believe that, it's not going to be a debate. And you know what? Yeah, people can change. And I've seen people change. So yeah, sure, give a chance, give more information, have more conversations. But in the end, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And if you've tried and tried and tried, and he's not changing, and he's not buying into it, and he's not caring about your pleasure, then again, please try to work on yourself. Try to respect that try to know you deserve better. And yeah, even in an abusive relationship, when you leave, you'll be sad, you'll be lonely, especially if it's a long-term one. It's not easy, but it is, in the long run. I I have never seen a woman leave an abusive relationship and regret it. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do think you're right. There's a lot of things that a woman in an abusive relationship will tell herself um, as a way to cope with staying in an abusive relationship. I mean, everyone who stays in an abusive relationship has their own reasons. It could be finances, it could be they want to justify it for the kids, the sake of the family, et cetera, et cetera. But the other piece, or the other defense mechanism, I guess you will, that comes to my mind that I've also heard women say is that sex is not that important to me anyway.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And, or I've heard women say, and, and people, there's been a lot of writings about what is this, women say, oh, they're satisfied by the closeness, even if they don't have an orgasm, da, da, da.
Right.
Sure, that's true for some women. I also think for some women, it's like this, what's it called? Cognitive dissonance. If you know you're not going to get one, right? Then you better think it's not important or you're going to be upset. Like, so that disconnect.
I'm wondering, is there a way that a woman can put this to the test? Maybe test herself to see if that's even true. That it doesn't matter. Sex doesn't matter as long if I don't have it, as long as we're close, or as long as I have this or that and other. Is there a way for them to, if they're listening to this show, is there a way that a woman can really test herself to find out if that's true or if that's just a defense mechanism so that she can feel safe and secure in her relationship?
Yeah, I think the only test would be to start having orgasmic sex and see if it becomes important to you.
I love that. So try it out and see if it works for you.
Yeah. I mean, get some basis of comparison. And, but I also want to say not every sexual encounter has to lead to orgasm. I mean, I think we have this very, also unhealthy goal-oriented view of sex. So, and pressure to have an orgasm is not compatible with having an orgasm. So like that said, though, what I'm talking about is these relationships where, for every like one of her orgasms, there's 10 of his or 3 to 4 of his. Like, it's okay sometimes if he doesn't, if you don't, sex doesn't always have to revolve around an orgasm. But what I'm talking about is an unequal distribution of pleasure.
Okay. And so, and just to clarify for the listeners, should you ever fake an orgasm?
No. Never. And if you have, don't be hard on yourself because this is new information to you. Mm-hmm. But again, by faking, you are teaching your partner to do exactly what doesn't work for you. And you're denying yourself for someone else.
Right. It's like you're giving a fake A.
Yeah, exactly.
So for women who, like you said, the woman who's been 30 years without an orgasm, and I imagine there's a lot more women out there who would not care to admit this openly, who have been faking and who've just kind of been going through the motions. How would you describe the process for women in the retraining of how to have an orgasm or how to have sex to meet their needs?
Well, first of all, it starts with the mind, right? It starts with believing that you deserve it, that your pleasure is equally as important. The belief, then it's figuring out how do you orgasm, because interestingly, every woman's genital nerves are positioned a bit differently. So masturbation, I know a lot of women are like, oh, I've been told that's bad or whatever, but I need to say it is a cornerstone of becoming orgasmic. It's one of the most proven scientific techniques, empirically validated techniques, as they call them, to help women orgasm. So pleasure yourself, find out what works for you. And then the next step is to talk to your partner and find a way to apply that to partnered sex, because the most essential step to becoming orgasmic with a partner is getting the same stimulation you get by yourself. And this circles back to where we were in the beginning. The way men pleasure themselves resembles intercourse. The way women pleasure themselves looks nothing like intercourse. So applying that to sexual pleasure. And then often women also need to train their mind in a different way. They need to incorporate mindfulness, or the ability to stay present rather than up in their head. Is he bored? Does he like this? Do I look fat? How is this going? So that's another step. So it's a multi-step process, but it is well worth the effort.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips on how someone can stay mindful and present and get out of their own anxiety, yes, if you will?
So I recommend developing mindfulness practice in daily life and then applying it to the bedroom. So, and basically mindfulness is simply putting your head and your body in the same space, rather than like, oh, my body is here, talking to you and I'm thinking about my laundry, or I'm in the middle of being touched and I'm thinking about something else. And, contrary to what people often hear, you don't need to like sit and meditate for hours to become mindful. Any moment can be a mindful one. If like brush your teeth, focus just a few seconds on fully immersing into the sensations, doing the dishes, and just keep practicing that. And mindfulness is also not about always staying present. It's about noticing when your mind wanders and being able to bring it back. That's the key to mindfulness. To say, oh, there it goes, my mind's wandering, bring it back. And you can bring it back through breath or from something you say. So practice in your daily life, and then bring it back, then take it to the bedroom. And I'll also say there's research that shows that yoga helps people develop mindfulness, because it really teaches you to be in the moment with your body. So, and yoga also is related to better sexual functioning too. So go start yoga and start paying attention to the sensations. And that's another way of saying, hey, I'm important.
That's awesome. Those are awesome tips. Yeah. And I've also heard the same thing about yoga, and there's even some yoga based practices that increase fertility from what I recall, like fertility based yoga, I think it's what it's called.
Never heard of that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Good. Very good. You never know. I learn something new every day.
Yeah. Learn something new every day. And one of the other things that I remember from the conference is that you talked a lot about, or you talked some about, women who masturbate with their fingers versus using a vibrator, and women feeling guilty about being pleasured by a vibrator and feeling like they should have to go back to doing it naturally with their fingers. And you were saying that women shouldn't feel that way and do that way. If vibrators are available, use them, and don't feel guilty about what methods you use in order to orgasm. Can you talk a little bit about that, the guilt that women have, and what that's about?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like they think there's some ideal way to orgasm, and that vibrators are bad or addictive, and that they'll ruin you for, sex with a partner. And it's like, no, if you like your vibrator, then just incorporate it into your sex life with your partner. And the clitorises are very sensitive to vibrations. And women have been using vibrations for years. I think I might have mentioned this in the conference. Before vibrators, women put bees in a box, a tightly sealed
yes,
box.
You did.
And then the box would vibrate, and they'd hold it against their vulva. Now, thank heavens, we don't have to do that anymore. You can go on Amazon.com and get yourself a really nice vibrator for $10, So, and people say, oh, it'll be addictive and I'll only be able to orgasm that way. And I say, well, nobody says to men, well, if you only orgasm from intercourse, you better mix it up and change it. Like however you orgasm is fine. And then people say it will substitute for my partner. And the metaphor I use is two metaphors. Like, one is, it's doesn't substitute. Does it say I love you? Does it cuddle? Does it, make you laugh? No, it's just enhances your sex. And kind of like a raft on a pool. If you're in the pool swimming with your partner and you have like a little raft and you're up and off the raft and you're playing and you're enjoying, you go back and you don't tell your friend, oh my God, I had so much fun with the raft today. And oh my gosh, my boyfriend happened to be there. I mean, you just say, I had a great day in the pool with my boyfriend. The raft is just a tool to help you float. So it's a lot like that.
Very eye-opening again, in that respect, and that again, I feel like we're coming back to that whole, we're being brainwashed to feel guilty about being pleasured, even by bringing toys into our sex life and saying, conditioned to feel like, oh, that's a bad thing and we'll get addicted to it. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, I do want to wrap it up. How can people reach you?
Well, I have a website, www.drlauriemintz.com, DRLAURIEMINTZ.com. So you can find out all more about me there. And if they're interested in buying my book in audiobook, Kindle, paperback, whatever, you can find that anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, indie bookstores, etc.
Awesome. Great. I think that's awesome. Are you doing anything, any sort of projects or anything coming up with you that people should be on the lookout for or support you with?
Oh, that's so nice of you to ask. No, I think right now I'm still focused on trying to close the orgasm gap. But once it's closed, I'll let you know what I'm going to move on to next.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Laurie.
Well, thank you, Dr. Natalie, and thank you for having me on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation.